Welcome back, SethBling here. Today we continue my quest to create a custom 360 card Mario-themed Magic the Gathering draft cube. I'm designing 360 cards. They're all custom designed by me for the purpose of building a cube, which is used for drafting. You know, kind of pick cards and build your own decks and then play against other people who drafted. So without further ado, let's just jump right on in. If you missed what this is all about, there is my first video talks about the whole design behind the set, and so there's a link in the video description if you want to check out that video. But the first video in the set goes over that. So okay, now actually, without further ado, in this video I'm going to show you some things I redesigned, some new mechanics, and then the next video tomorrow will have some other things I redesigned and new mechanics. But there's 28 cards. I'm going to do 14 and 14. So Super Mario is a card I showed off in my very first video. In fact, I think it was the very first card I showed off. And I've done a bit of a redesign on it. Originally it was mono red. I've now changed it to being all three colors of the heroes and power-ups shard. So the set is divided into sets of three colors. So the heroes and power-ups is a theme of you want to play creatures and then enchant or equip them. And that's sort of the theme of that that set of colors. And so previously Mario had 3 different activated abilities that required the 3 different colors. And I just went on vacation. I came back from Cancun yesterday, or 2 days ago. And while I was on vacation, I did a lot of reading on the beach from Magic the Gathering head designer Mark Rosewater. And it really drove home some points about things like complexity. And so I want to try and reduce complexity wherever I can. So instead of having 3 activated abilities that could really change how the math works out, it's got this one ability that's very easy to look at and understand what it does. So first of all, I made his stats square, which means power and toughness are the same. And then he also has this effect which can modify them, but there's also a square modification. So he's either a 4/4 or a 6/6 plus whatever the auras might give him. As long as Mario is enchanted or equipped, he gets +2/+2 and has flying and first strike. So this is, kind of the flagship card of both the set, being a Mario set, and also for this shard. And it really shows you that you really want to try and enchant or equip your creatures. And he's still got the super keyword, which hasn't changed. But basically, Mario, you enchant or equip him and he gets really powerful, and also you don't lose the value if your opponent's able to have a removal spell for Mario. You can just sacrifice the aura, he goes back to being normal Mario, and then you can try and enchant or equip him again. And so this is just a much more streamlined version of the card. It's a lot it's a lot easier to tell what it's doing at any given time, rather than if you have a bunch of open mana, you don't really know, there's a lot of options for what you could have done in terms of pumping them up and stuff like that. So I like this design. It's a lot cleaner and just easier to read and easier to digest. Next up is maybe my favorite card of the set. I spent way too long on this. I spent actually hours just trying to figure out this. This is a letter from the princess. The text is, "Mountains are red, islands are blue. Creatures with super get +1/+2. It's a little poem, kind of a roses are red, violets are blue parody. The idea is the text on the card is the text that you would find on the letter from the princess. She's written you a little love letter. Creatures with super tend to be playable characters like Mario and Luigi, so it makes a lot of sense that a letter from the princess would buff your creature with super. And these first 2 lines are actually functional rules text on a card. Mountains are normally colorless, so are islands, and so this gives them a color. It doesn't change anything about the mana they produce or anything like that. There's something weird where if you have a land that's like an island mountain, like Volcanic Island would be or something, I think it ends up making them blue and not red. So that's kind of weird, but it doesn't matter. The main point is that this buffs your creatures with super while rhyming and forming a nice little love letter. There's not that many words that end with the "oo" syllable in that go in Magic text. There's 2 and "you" and "crew," but it's hard to end a sentence with "crew." Anyway, I'm really happy with where this card ended up. Next we have Pauline. I realized that there weren't really any mono red creatures with super, and Pauline just seems like a very basic, straightforward creature with super. I think in red, it makes a lot of sense to have sort of a weaker version of the super, since auras and equipment is not exactly a red theme most of the time. But this gives you a really a potential for a really aggressive start, which is sort of where red wants to be. And so I think this is a good fit for red in terms of having a creature with super, but straightforward otherwise. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker is someone in my Twitch chat suggested having an Auramancer type card. So Auramancer returns an aura to your hand, or actually I think it's an enchantment to your hand when it enters the battlefield. I wanted to up the mana cost a little bit. Auramancer costs 3. Basically, I wanted to make sure that you had a better chance of having an aura in your graveyard when you wanted to cast Captain Toad. And so I upped the mana cost a little bit and gave him a little bit more power. So when he enters the battlefield or dies, you may return target aura or equipment card from your graveyard to your hand. And he also has super, which helps explain, if you're like new to the set, why it would return both aura and equipment. It's because super references aura and equipment. And so you can play them like later in the game if you like have another creature and you enchanted it, and you use that enchantment as part of the super ability, then you can get that back. Or if you play Toad and then enchant him with something, and then you have to sacrifice that enchantment, and then Toad eventually dies, you can get that enchantment back. So he's got a lot of potential for value. You can get 3 cards out of this one card. So it's a 3-for-1 if you play it in a deck that's really heavy on enchantments that are likely to go to the graveyard, which is auras, or even equipment. Yeah, it's pretty rare in a normal game of Magic that you'd find equipment in the graveyard, but this set gives you a much easier way to get equipment to the graveyard. Toadette is another card I really wanted to design to enable the super theme. So when you cast an aura or equipment spell, draw a card. Really straightforward, really powerful if you're deep into that strategy. And she herself also has super, so she's a very nice card to enchant because you can protect her and protect your card advantage engine, which is nice. Okay, so next up I'm going to talk about a mechanic that I created. Basically, I had this card, Reznor. It was very similar to this. Basically, it got 4+1/+1 counters when it entered the battlefield, and then whenever it took damage, instead of taking the damage, it would remove a counter. I realized that there were several other cards I wanted to design that had very similar behavior in terms of behave very similar to Reznor, and that if I gave it a keyword, I could make them all behave in a consistent way and make it a little bit easier to digest all the different cards that are doing very similar things. So Reznor has this 4 lives mechanic. So the reminder text here is this creature enters the battlefield with 4+1/+1 counters on it. If it would be destroyed while it has a +1/+1 counter, instead remove all damage and a +1/+1 counter from it. So basically, instead of dying, it just loses a counter. It's kind of like indestructible, but it gets smaller every time it gets destroyed instead of just nothing happening. And then it's also got this fire breathing ability because Reznor is breathe fire. So this guy's a 4/4, pretty straightforward. 4/4 that's really hard to kill for 6 mana. I think that's fine in terms of, I don't know. We'll have to do playtesting obviously to see how powerful this is, but it's very hard to kill. But let's look at some of the other cards that I was able to use this lives mechanic on. So here's Rex. Rex used to be a 3/2 that was dealt damage in the form of -1/-1 counters. I didn't like the idea of having -1/-1 counters and +1/+1 counters in the same set, so I'm trying to minimize that. And this lives mechanic made a lot of sense for Rex. So Rex, if you jump on Rex the first time, he sort of gets squished down in half, and if you jump on him again, he dies. And so this is kind of like a 3/2 with persist. He's got 2 lives, so he enters with 2 +1/+1 counters. He's a 3/2, and then when he dies the first time, he comes back as a 2/1. Except he never goes to the graveyard and comes back. He just stays around. If you can pump him up, then the 2 lives actually matters. Like if you can give him +1/+1 with another card, then he'll die twice and come back. But otherwise, he mostly just dies once, then dies again, and he's gone. So then Pokey was one of the cards that I wanted to design with a mechanic like this, and he's one of the reasons that I wanted to have the lives mechanic. So Pokey costs green and X and has X lives, and it enables some really cool things having this lives mechanic, because you can have negative power, which is something that's Wizards of the Coast has designed some cards like that in the past. And it's fun, I think, to have a card with negative power. The idea being that as you put more +1/+1 counters on it, grows bigger than, -2. And so this card feels very different, I think, than Reznor. Reznor, is a 4/4 for 6 mana. If you want to cast Pokey for 6 mana, he's a 3/5, which is a just very different set of power and toughness. He's more flexible in terms of when you cast him. He can be a good chump blocker for a while and keeps shrinking, though, so eventually he'll go away. Or if you wait really long into the late game, he can be a really powerful attacker that's hard to deal with. The other nice thing about this is having these creatures with the lives mechanic makes them really good candidates for enchanting with auras. So, other than just having your creatures with super that are a good place to put your auras, you might also be able to put them on these guys with lives, because they're just like a little bit more resilient and you're a little bit less likely to get blown out by having the creature die to removal. So then I realized that I could also use this as a way to give extra lives. And so 1-Up used to give the creature super, which I thought was really elegant. But this is kind of even more elegant, given that I have this extra life mechanic, right? So target creature gains 1 extra life, which means put a +1/+1 counter on it for the rest of the game if it would be destroyed while it has a +1/+1 counter. Instead, remove all damage and a +1/+1 counter from it. You also exile 1-Up. So the reason that you exile 1-Up is so that you don't have to put it into your graveyard, and instead you can sort of put it with the creature, sort of like you would do with an aura. You can like virtually attach it to it. Since it's exiled, you don't need it to be somewhere else. And that will act as a reminder for what the +1/+1 counters on that creature means. Because other creatures can have ways of getting +1/+1 counters on them, and if they do, those counters will act as extra lives. And just given the way that the rule is worded. I did think about making the counters like some other kind of counter other than +1/+1, so you wouldn't have that interaction, and like other +1/+1 counters wouldn't count as extra lives. But I think it's way more important for the extra lives to be impactful to gameplay, and I think they're not very impactful if they're just sort of like, you have to kill this guy a bunch of times. Instead, the creature's constantly changing in its power and toughness as you're killing it. And so that's 1-Up. 1-Up is an instant, so you can sort of like use it at instant speed to save a creature that would die, which is nice, and it's like very cheap. So it's very nice in the auras deck if you just like want to save a creature. It works really well for that. And you get the +1/+1 counter, so you can use it just for the +1/+1 counter and also for the protection. And then the impetus for designing this whole mechanic was actually this card. It was 3 balloons. Originally, this was going to be Balloon Battle. The title of the card was going to be Balloon Battle, and it was going to either make both players have 3 sort of lives, or maybe every creature got 3 sort of lives. I wasn't really sure how to do it. Eventually I settled on not giving it to, making it symmetric, but rather giving one cart or creature 3 balloons like you have in the Balloon Battle, and so it can take 3 hits before dying. And so this grants 3 extra lives, and you also exile this card, so you can again put 3 balloons with the card that you're targeting, and you'll have a reminder of what those +1/+1 counters mean. So this is a much more impactful card. You get 3. You have to kill it 3 times, and it gets a lot of power and toughness with this. So it costs a lot more, and it's also a sorcery. And another difference is it can target vehicles. 3 balloons, flavor-wise, I think should be able to target vehicles since it's a Mario Kart card. And that is the theme of the Mario Kart part of this set. Next up is a redesign of a card, Yoshi. So Yoshi used to be a creature that you could use to like pump another creature, and you could sacrifice it to give a creature flying, as sort of a joke about how like you can sacrifice Yoshi to ditch Yoshi into a pit to prevent yourself from dying. I changed it around, and I'm really happy with this. I think it's a little bit simpler. It uses the bestow mechanic from the Theros block. Which means this is actually an aura if you want to cast it as an aura for 5 mana. And then if the creature that it's enchanting dies, then it becomes this 3/3 creature. So while it's an aura, it gives the enchanted creature +3/+3. And I also copied this ability from the old version of the card, it's a little bit different, but it's a little bit less flexible actually. Whenever Yoshi or enchanted creature attacks, you may pay 1 and a white. When you do, you may exile target creature with toughness 1. And so this like is really good against minions, and there's various other cards with toughness 1 in the set. and so it gives him a little bit of extra power. Basically, he can like stick out his tongue and eat a little creature, and that's the flavor there. So it's either the creature it's enchanting or Yoshi himself. So it's got a lot of flexibility in how you play him. And the nice thing is you can also, if you bestow Yoshi onto a creature with super, you can still ditch Yoshi to save the creature. You can sacrifice Yoshi as an enchantment in order to trigger the super ability. And so it doesn't lose that that joke about ditching Yoshi, which is, I think, is great. So moving on, baby form, this is kind of a flavor card. There's a lot of like baby cards in Mario lore, you know, baby Mario, baby Luigi, baby princesses, baby Bowser, everything. So I thought it'd be cool if you had a flexible card that you could, if you like attach this to Bowser, he becomes baby Bowser. And they lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1/1. And one of the cool things about the creature losing all abilities is if you attach this to a creature with super, there won't be any confusion about whether that creature can sacrifice baby form. It turns out they wouldn't be able to anyway. Super says sacrifice an aura or equipment you control. You can't, according to the rules of the game, you can't actually sacrifice a permanent you don't control. So this you control here that I added in is actually, it's technically superfluous, but if you attached, you know, baby form to Mario, it'd be baby Mario, and if it was your opponent's card, they wouldn't be able to sacrifice baby form because you control baby form and they don't. But losing all abilities just like takes that out of the equation completely, and I like that. And yeah, and I like, yeah. Anyway, and then let's see, we have 2 more cards in this video. So Ruined Dragon, I just played Mario Odyssey. I played it a bit on stream, but I also played it a lot off stream. And towards the end of the game, you fight this dragon that's like not at all cartoony, kind of like the rest of the game. It looks sort of like a realistic depiction of a dragon. I mean, not that dragons are real, but so I thought it was a cool boss. And basically, when you first encounter it, it just like breathes lightning and blows your airship out of the sky. Your airship is called the Odyssey, which is actually the next card I'm going to go to, and it'll be the last card for the video. And so it just has a simple effect. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target creature or vehicle. It's a really strong card, but you know, it costs 6. And I think it's pretty flavorful. So, and it's very simple. So I like all of those things about it. And then, so the final card for today's video is the Odyssey, which fits actually more into the Mario Kart block since it's a vehicle, but or the Mario Kart shard, the Mario Kart part of the set, which is black, blue, white. The Odyssey has flying. It's an airship. The Odyssey gets +1/+1 for each differently named non-creature permanent you control. So this counts things like lands. It counts things like enchantments or artifacts. It counts other vehicles that haven't been crewed. And so the idea here is that the flavor idea is that as you collect more power moons, you power up the Odyssey. And so these like different lands you're finding and different artifacts and stuff are sort of the power moons that are powering up the Odyssey. The reason it says non-creature is twofold. One, creatures don't really feel like power moons to me. And then the other thing is that you wouldn't want to get into combat with the Odyssey at like, you know, 7/7 or something, and then have one of your other creatures die, and then that would actually shrink it. And so it might look like it would survive combat, but then its toughness would decrease at the end of combat, and it would actually end up dying. And that's a really confusing interaction. So I changed it to something that's a little bit less likely to change after combat, or at least decrease after combat. And then it's got crew 3. So this was actually originally crew 4. We did some playtesting. It was a little bit hard to crew. We'll see where this ends up in the power level wise. But I think it's a pretty strong card. By default, it's sort of like a 6/6 since you need... I guess technically by default it's a 5/5 since you need a plains and an island to cast it. But you're pretty likely in this set to be playing 3 colors, and it's at least going to be a 6/6, probably more, because there's a lot of non-basic lands and stuff like that. All right, that will do it for this video. Tomorrow I'm going to be covering the other 14 cards. There's going to be a lot more Mario Kart type cards and also some Mario Maker type cards. So join me tomorrow as I talk about those. That's about it. Thanks for watching.